afternoon to all. Vanakkam Anivarkam. I'm standing here as a witness, though I left the island just a few months before the final onslaught against the Tamil nation. After my father's relatives got to know that dogs are my favorite pet, they brought me a cute dog. It became not only a good friend of me, but to my parents as well. In my absence at home, my dog replaced my existence. During a spying operation by the Sri Lankan occupying forces, they tried to poison my dog, but he managed to escape. However, my dog couldn't escape the second time. This tragedy made my parents very sad. But the news did not reach my relatives until they came for my father's funeral later in time. Once they heard about the death of my dog, they were extremely shocked and sad the way it was killed. We all cried when we lost our dog. Time passed, but the memories remained. Some months later, the final direct genocidal war, which intentionally and consistently targeted my nation and its people, intensified. This led to the disappearances and murder of some of my relatives. A historical area of my nation became the killing fields. Shattered tears of the injured people, scattered dead bodies. My nation and our hearts burned into the flames of the genocidal regime. No one remained to cry for those losses. When my dog was killed, there were people to cry. But when my people were slaughtered, no one was there to cry for them. More than 100,000 Tamil people were killed, unaccounted for, and displaced as a result of genocide. This key message was what we, as committed and thoughtful journalists and activists, wanted to tell to the world. It resulted in a considerable number of my colleagues being killed, abducted, disappeared, and compelled to remain in exile, including me. With this short introduction, I will move on to my key topic of the event. So, I'm not going to touch upon all of my slides because as some of the message has already have conveyed. And here my main focus area is not only the Sri Lankan government was challenged to our work. At some point, some international media institutions and Sri Lankan or national media institutions also were not very helpful during our hard times. Actually, what we have aimed to report: death, injuries, displacement, shortages of food, medicine, suffering, and etc. What message have we attempted to convey and how? The key message while we were telling to the world that it is not an humanitarian operation, as Mr. Tissanayam said, because it is not a humanitarian operation because the government used medicine, food and medicine as a weapon of war. In a later stage, rape also became a weapon of war. On one hand, while the international community, especially the UN, who claim that they don't want to count the dead bodies, but they are planning to protect the civilians. This article was written in 2017. That time we called for a no-fire zone with the consideration of lessons learned from the past failures of other foreign countries such as Aceh, Vietnam, and Philippines. So it's a Tamil journalist who already alerted in 2007 that we were talking about early warning. So still, archives of the Tinakural in 2007 can be found in Sri Lankan archives. That we were talking about the early warning in 2007 March. We were talking about no fire zone. So not in the last minute or last stage of the war. Principal focus, the Sri Lankan government, as I'm not going to touch that point in detail or deeply because it's already conveyed, how they continued. But the sad part was that time the Sri Lankan government embassy statements were kind of well received by the international bodies. At some point they were repeating the Sri Lankan government embassy statements. Just before they start the final onslaught, the Sri Lankan government started the low-intensified war to targeting the Tamil journalists. So this is why, as a journalist who was in the conflict zone, who lost quite a number of my journalist colleagues, why I am emphasizing to call the Tamil journalists why purposely targeted. I don't disagree that in Sri Lanka, journalists from different communities were targeted. I do not have any disagreement with that. I do respect. But Tamil journalists were targeted intentionally for a purpose. And also the government, before they started the low-intensified war, during the low-intensified war, the government, including Defense Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was labeling Tamil journalists either terrorist or supporting terrorism. That's not only what is the disturbing, but what's the disturbing thing is not only the Sri Lankan regime that was happening, national movement that was established or identified themselves to protect and promote press freedom also was silent at some point. I think as Tisarna was there, I think we were in January 2018 in a place called Kandalama. I think 1.5 months later, our meeting Tisarna along and another 2 journalists were arrested and detained. One of the writer called Mr. Jasikaran, when he was arrested, the national media institution, they were repeating the government version, so he could be a LTT member. But what was very disturbing was, we know the intention of the government, but who we believed as a comrade, who will be with us in that hard path, also believed, and in some point there were no interventions from them to protect, because they believed the government version, because we are Tamil journalists. So they believed the government version, so we could be connected or well connected to the LTT. So why another reason that we wanted to emphasize Tamil journalists were targeted purposely. Other disturbing event was that committee to protect journalists. They are contributing for press freedom in Sri Lanka. They are concerned about that. But if you visit their website, they call 19 journalists killed in Sri Lanka since 1992, motive confirmed. And 6 journalists killed in Sri Lanka, motive unconfirmed. Anyone can challenge us. We are ready to go for anyone. That since the Rajapaksa came to power, the 46 journalists or media workers were killed, and we have documented each and every name, incident where it took place. We are ready to challenge anyone. But this is what we think. My colleagues who gave their lives for the press freedom, for the truth, for the justice, and in a later stage, after their murder or the assassination, even the media institution failed to recognize their commitment. So that was disappointing for us. And to prove that, I think it's JDS and TAG. JDS is Journalists for Democracy in Sri Lanka, and TAG, Tamils Against Genocide, that well documented to challenge. If you take why we emphasize on the Tamil journalists purposely target, if you take 87% of the journalists who are killed in Sri Lanka are Tamils. If you take the region, So Mullaitivu, 33 journalists were killed. In Jaffna, 26. So if we take this one, according to this statistics, so we can understand the Sri Lankan state intention. Sri Lankan state intention, why they wanted to shoot in the messenger, as we were conveying the message to the world. When we were talking about creating a no-fire zone, when we were talking about the early warning system, when we were challenging the Sri Lankan numbers game about the population in Vanni, when we were talking about or writing about the cluster bombs, when we were alerting the international community if the aid agencies or humanitarian agencies leave, what will be the consequences, but not at that point, were not listened or not heard in their ideas. But 5 years later, UN accepted as a systemic failure, and last month US accepted what US called as a loss of life in Sri Lanka conflict could have been averted. The global community acted early and more appropriately to situations in some troubled nations, similar to Sri Lanka, which is accused of human rights abuses during the military campaigns against LTT. I think these embassies, not only the US, almost all Western-based embassies were already, they received all informations. Even that we were called in order to avoid a bloodbath, immediate prompt action in war zone is important. But what is still that we appreciate that they have accepted at least 5 years later. But we would be more grateful if they would have acted 5 years ago. At least some of my friends to be with me today, or at least thousands of people, we could claim our relatives of existing. So it could be at least it could be a lessons learned, not just as a slogan, never again. It could be a lessons learned for other conflict zones. It could be applied to what is ongoing in the country or in the world. And now these ongoing threats, if we take Jaffna Press Club, that they, journalists in the, I'm sorry that I'm talking only Jaffna Press Club, it doesn't mean that it represents Jaffna, but it's a voice of the Northeast journalists, though the holding the name is Jaffna, but still under intimidation, threats. Even last week, a good friend and who would be a good reliable source from the island was threatened, and he was followed for nearly 3 months. Not only him, at least 6 journalists were in an immediate risk. We already reported to the respective embassies and relevant media institution. We hope we won't lose another colleague or comrade in the near future. And the other ongoing threat is that the Sri Lankan government or the defense establishment through military intelligence and the fundamentalist groups that they intimidate to stop a workshop on digital security, but they think as a consequences or serious consequences that if the digital security of the Tamil journalists but strengthened, or that will be an avenue for a flow of information. So what the previous speaker, Ms. Kanavadi said, it wasn't a war. It wasn't a war that without witness. We have collected, we have received many documents, and through another organization we have already conveyed to the relevant people, and we still have here in diaspora as well as on the ground. But the government restriction is, earlier they killed our people, now they blocked to seek justice for those who were killed. I think the morning speaker, Dr. Ibrahim Saw, said journalists became human rights defenders in a situation when they have experiencing injustice. I think that's true, completely agree. And when we have experiencing the nation is destroyed, when we have experiencing through our practical life on the ground, and what we believe through our studies, when a nation is facing a genocide, I think it is automatic. It's a human nature. It's a moral responsibility to protect that nation, to reporting the truth in order to seek justice. So as once Sivaramanna said nearly a year ago before his assassination, the Tamil nation cannot be destroyed through killings one Nadesan or one Sivara. So when I call as a Tamil nation, it is not a racist ideology or something like that. I think in the Tamil nation, when the Tamil nation is strengthened, then only the past experience taught us, if we have a strong Tamil nation only, we will be protected and we are free to do our professional journalism work. The current trends, as you know, not only in the past, even how the Sri Lankan or the Colombo-based media, how they portray that attack on the Jaffna University students. So simply I remember Daily Mirror that they called this attack, they simply labeling or connecting as terrorist. How Sri Lanka using the war on terror still on to attack the democratic process of the Tamil people. And also the Sri Lankan government used this war on terror pre, during and post resolution, as some of you well aware how they used their crackdown the human rights defenders, activists and journalists. I would like to mention one my personal experience while we were on A9 highway immediately after the ceasefire agreement signed, with nearly 5 vehicles of Tamil and Sinhala journalists, a few Tamil journalists and most of them are Sinhalese. While we were in Kilinochchi, where if there was overspeed, more than 30 kilometers, the police of Tamil, they stopped. It's no matter it's a TNA MP or LGT commander, as far as I know, that was the role there. And they stopped and they said, okay, that you are overspeed. And suddenly the journalists who were inside the vehicle, they were talking in Sinhala. Then the police officer asked, are you Sinhalese? As a Tamil, I realized why he asked. He was former constable in Sri Lankan police. And then he said, in this territory that if you are overspeed more than 30 kilometers, you will be fine. He said in Sinhala. So in Sinhala for word called kick. So he said, Hayeng youth, fine ganwa, right? We will find you if you overspeed. For Sinhala word for kick is fine ganwa, right? So this media came to Colombo and wrote, the LGT police stopped and they said, or they asked, you're Sinhalese? Later they said, if you go overspeed, we will kick you. But actually what they said, fine, they changed with one word. And this is how the Colombo-based media is continuing. And even after that, we call that proudly, the Colombo-based English-speaking and Sinhala media, that the new media is available, and they are doing. But just they are active. But if you take 2 case studies, how they act, very proactive during Alagama incident. And if you take the case study of Jaffna University students, until the statement from the US Embassy, the new media in Colombo was silent on that incident. So anyone could go back to the Twitter archives or anything, that if you observe, so until the statement from the US Embassy, even the new media was silent, because these people were Tamil. So in conclusion, in memory and dedication to assassinated journalists, my final thoughts: we will fight until it brings impunity to an end. We will continue our struggle until the truth is heard. we won't give up until the journey to seek justice has reached its final destination. Thank you.